a friend of mine says a bird is not an ornithologist. So, I have to be a bit of an ornithologist to teach there, but I'm trying to teach them how to be a bird.
That's a song called Allison, written by Michael Wolff, our guest today, and the bassist Ben Allison. They recorded this together fairly recently, and Michael Wolff has now released a memoir called On That Note. So we're going to talk about the book and about music and lots of great stories. I really enjoyed talking to Michael. Thanks for listening. This is the A Noise from the Deep podcast at Greenleaf Music. Visit greenleafmusic.com to subscribe to the label, get all the music we do, all the podcast episodes, and there's sheet music and lots more. So thanks for listening. Enjoy this interview with Michael Wolff. Wow, Michael Wolff, thank you so much for joining me, making the time.
Thanks for inviting me, man. It's such a pleasure to finally meet you, even if it's over
Zoom.
Waves,
Right, and you're on the opposite coast. You're in LA.
Yeah, I'm on LA.
But yeah, I love the book, and I realized that in July you're turning 70. So congratulations.
Yeah, what the fuck? Yeah.
Hey, it's a family podcast.
I'm sorry. What the heck? I'm just glad to. You can edit that out. I mean, I do have Tourette's, so I have kind of a license to swear. But
yes, absolutely. And it is a music podcast, so go for it.
No, it's actually, I feel good about turning 70 because I almost died, a few years ago. So for me, just being alive every year, I'll take it, even though in the past, I mean, when I turned 50, it just freaked me out. Certain years got me, but now I'm happy to turn 70.
Yeah, that's great. And the book, really represents that. It's one of the things that I thought was really inspiring about it is the perspective. It's called On That Note, a memoir of jazz, tics, and survival. One of the all-time great subtitles. And it's, I usually, you start from your childhood in the book, which is great.
By the way, it's sort of a takeoff on Sex, Lies, and Videotape. I do. Yeah, in the book, I start with a little bit of I saw this movie, of course, I can never remember the name of it, with Harrison Ford, and the whole first maybe 10, 15 minutes is a train wreck. So that's why I put the first chapter, which is when I almost died, leaving my apartment, But
you end up with this perspective about music and life and about your family and what in thinking about it, I was kind of like, I usually ask people about their early musical experience. And in your case, it feels like it's more, having done the thought work on the book, it's more like all of a piece that
Yeah.
the music, the way you learned it over all so many years and the way you play it now, and the tie to your early musical experiences seems like, and your family, everything's sort of fitting together in this beautiful way.
Well, I learned it, and I don't know how you learned it, but I mean, let's just say in my day, when coming up in the 60s and early 70s, I think at that time, the only real jazz program that I knew about was Berklee School of Music. I mean, I went to UCLA and UC Berkeley, but I'm a music major, but there was no jazz. I mean, we formed a little jazz band, a big jazz band, and had some little groups. So it was sort of, I had a couple of great teachers in the San Francisco Bay Area. I grew up in Berkeley from the time I was 9 years old, earlier in the South, but Berkeley, California. I had a couple of great teachers, Dick Whittington and Bill Bell. But they were piano teachers, but they weren't like the way people teach now. It was sort of like, well, here's how I do it, and check it out. And I play some scales, and I had to figure it out myself. And I had, luckily, some great musicians that were older than I was, because it's like, I think music's like tennis. You got to play with people that are better than you, if you want to get good. So I had Ray Drummond, the great bassist, was in the Bay Area at the time, and he took me under his wing, and we would get together and, go over Ludmila Ulela's contemporary harmony book, which I love and still love it. And we'd listen to Coltrane and Miles and try to play, So that's really how I learned, it was more from people and being on the bandstand and all the stuff I teach at NYU now. When I teach my students, I really try to give them my perspective. They have the academic perspective, which is great, but it's not the same. Nobody really talks about what's underneath the music. They just talk about the scales and the chords and blah, 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 and the history. And, when I played with Cannonball and Sonny Rollins and all those people, we never had one discussion about any of that. You would talk about, is our music reaching people? How does it feel? It was never intellectual. And I remember when I joined Cannonball's band, I had just come to New York in 74, and from the Bay Area, and I had to learn Moment's Notice and Giant Steps and all these hard tunes. And I said, hey, Cannon, could we play Giant Steps or Moment's Notice? And he goes, no, we don't play exercises in our band. Why don't you write me some music, So that was the approach they had, it was just a different approach. And that's what I osmotically gained from being in that life.
But do you feel like, I mean, you have two sons that are great musicians,
right?
Stylistically broad, and I mean, I get the feeling from the book like you did transmit a lot of that music to them, but also what they do is so different. Do you feel like sharing in that way with your family?
I think, again, for them, what I tried to do is I didn't want my kids, if you force them to do anything, like I wasn't forced to do music. I lived and breathed and ate it, because I wanted it. And I was inspired by my father, who was really a doctor, but he had perfect pitch and he loved music. And so he would just play it for me, and that's all. And then I just had to do it. But for my kids, I played music for them when they were in the womb. I would put Monk on and Ravel and Stravinsky and just whatever. With my wife, I go, lie still. I'm going to play this on your stomach, And when they were born, I just made sure to have a lot of instruments around the house. I never said a word to them about it. And I just let them pick it up.
Wow.
They come to my gigs, and I wouldn't give them lessons till they begged me for lessons. So my oldest son, Nat, who's 27 now, was maybe about 6 years old. He said, Dad, I want to take piano lessons. I go, are you sure? I mean, I wasn't going to teach him because I knew that would be a nightmare. And really, truthfully, I never found a great teacher for him, but various teachers. And I wanted to make sure it came from them. Otherwise, they didn't have to be musicians. They like basketball and skateboarding, and I was cool with whatever they wanted to do. And then his little brother, Alex, who's now 24, was looking up at his brother and going, man, I'm going to do this, So he got into drums, and, they're just, now they have like perfect pitch, and they can play all the instruments, and, they make albums where they play every instrument. They might hire a trumpet player, I'll give them your number. They love trumpet, so they put trumpet on their albums. And
get me on it.
Yeah, I'm going to get you on it, man. I would hook you up. You know, so I mean, I remember sitting with my oldest son, Nat, listening to Pavane for a Dead Princess, this beautiful piece by Ravel. And it's a piano piece and it's an orchestra piece. And it'd be late at night and he wasn't sleeping. And I'd take him in, we're in New York, and I'd just take him in and put it on and we would just listen to it together. And I wanted to repeat that warm feeling that I had of my father, because my father was such a sweet guy when it came to music and golf and things that he loved. And so he would sit with me and we'd listen to music and he'd just tell me what was happening. So I don't know if I was as instructional, but I just wanted to share that feeling with them, you know.
Wow, that's deep. Yeah, everybody should go pick up this book. It's great. And I remember, you talk about that in one of the first few chapters. And
because I thought my background was, of course, you know, it's when I looked back at everything that I was able to make a little bit of sense out of it. I mean, the way I wrote is the way I play music. I sat down at the computer every day, and I'm the tortoise and not the hare, you know. So I would sit down for a half hour, an hour, and just vignettes would come to me, and I wouldn't have to. People say, "How do you remember it?" I didn't have to remember it. I would just start writing, and I would be in that space, you know. I'd be on the road with my family, 61, driving from Memphis to Berkeley, California, in the summer, in a station wagon with no air conditioning and a foam thing in the backpack that we'd sleep in, you know, stuff like that. So I would just remember things, you know. And I had a friend who just passed away named Da Chen, Chinese writer, fantastic writer, who encouraged me along the way. And he said, "Hey, if it's a memoir, it's your memory, man. You can say whatever you want to say, you know." But, so if it makes it a better story, do whatever you have to do, or maybe amalgamate a few things or different people, whatever. But basically, it was. I feel it was kind of like writing this book took about 10 years, and it was just the biggest thing I ever did, and the most so satisfying. I mean, I made a lot, you know, over 25 albums or something, and played with so many people, and all that sort of led up to this, where I could express all this stuff in a literary book, which I didn't think, you know, I'd ever be able to do, you know.
And that's the perspective that I picked up from it, that it's this broad view and ties everything that's happened together. Did you feel like you had to, I mean, memoir always brings this up. Did you have to pull any punches? Were there any times when you felt like, I can't really say that about that person?
Definitely. Once the Me Too thing happened, I had to cool out about all the girls on the road and, you know, all the way the life was in the 70s. I didn't put all that stuff in there. You know, it was kind of, you know what it is? It's more like editing out what doesn't flow, you know, what doesn't push the narrative. And so it was just like, here's how it did. When I sat down to write this book, I decided to write a how-to book about being a musician, because I figured, well, you know, I've had all these experiences as a musical director and for Nancy Wilson, a jazz musician, you know, TV show. I'll just write about all that for musicians that might like it, how to be a leader, how to be a sideman, how to be a conductor, how to go on the road. So I wrote 100 pages of that. And then I looked at it and I went, man, I'm like Holden Caulfield, you know, in Catcher in the Rye, when he was taking a speech class. And when some people would be giving their speech on a certain subject, and the minute they went off course, the group would yell, digression, digression. And I realized I like digressions into the stories. Then I have a funny story about Cannonball, or a soulful story, or a sad story. That's what I like. So I realized, I think that's the book I want to write, you know.
Nice.
It took me 100 pages of that. And then it took me 2 years of writing. You know how as a musician, we want to play the way we are. And that takes a while. At least it did for me, because I had so many influences and I could imitate a lot of people. So it took me a couple of years to feel like I didn't want it to be like the New Yorker or an author necessarily. I wanted to sound like the way I speak, you know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's great. I want to ask you some questions about those musical experiences and some
Yeah.
stories in the book. But let's hear a little bit more from this album, Swirl. It's with Ben Allison and Alan Mednard. And this is the tune that's called Metairie, which I guess has a New Orleans connection. So that's Metairie, and that's from a live gig?
Well, you know what it is? Yeah, this whole album was live. I did it for WBGO has a relationship with Yamaha pianos, and they have a beautiful, huge room, like a loft, really, on Fifth Avenue and 54th in Manhattan. And it has just Yamaha, and now they own Bosendorfer, Yamaha and Bosendorfer pianos all over. Wow. So I had been asked to do, John Newcott does development, over there, and he also produces my albums. Just
great!
Friends.
I've known him pretty much as long as I've known anyone.
Well, you were probably on Verve or something, so he was marketing at Verve.
I can't even remember how, but it was years and years. Yeah.
But anyway, so BGO would do all kinds of special things, and they were doing a thing on Errol Garner. And he said, "Hey, would you come and do this Errol Garner thing?" And I go, "Oh, I love Errol Garner. I never play live, but." So I came, and Kenny Werner was there, and Andy Milne and Christian Sands, and we all played. And I had been, when I was really making my comeback from cancer, and I was really not well. I mean, I'd lost my hair, I'd been taking all these drugs, I was bloated, and I was feeling shitty, and I was still on a ton of Percocet and prednisone, and all these meds, right? Cancer meds. Mm. So, but I only had to play 2 tunes. I thought, okay, so I did making Whoopi solo, and then I did a trio thing with Ben, and he said, "Hey, I said, let's get a drummer," and he knew Alan Bednard, so we called Alan. Mm-hmm. We did. You can't take that away from me. Anyway, after that, I realized I wanted to take this trio and record, so I asked Newcott about it. He said, "Well, we could make it a WBGO event. We can do it live." So he just hooked it up. They have a recording thing there. They can record it. In fact, recently I just recorded a thing with his book where we did book readings with actors, Tony Shalhoub and Holly Hunter and my son Alex and Brooke Adams. And then I wrote a piece during the pandemic called Pandemia for Jazz Piano Trio and String Quartet. So we did all that. They do video and audio. But with Swirl, it was my first record. So recorded it, went through all the tunes in the afternoon. The people came in, we did a live concert, and then put the thing together. So I love playing for an audience. It's my best thing. I've done a lot of studio records, and they have their own thing. But for me, live is exciting, the most exciting.
Wow. Yeah. It came out great. And it's a great trio. I hope, after this whole pandemic thing, that you guys are out there touring and playing.
Yeah, we just did SF Jazz, which was, again, that was supposed to be in March of 2020. And,
right.
It got canceled. We finally got to do it with that trio, and we had a blast. Yeah, it was so great. Such a great trio. I love those guys.
Yeah. So you mentioned some of these musical encounters, some of which are in the book and some of which I imagine you have like 1,000 others that didn't make it into the book. But one of the ones that really, I jumped out of my chair when I read the advice that Bill Evans gave you. So the thing, you used to go hang with Bill, he'd come to town,
Yeah.
you'd go to all 3 sets and then go out to a diner with Bill Evans and just hang and talk. And you were working on Stella by Starlight. And in the extra for this episode, we're going to listen to Stella, the recording that Miles made with Herbie and George Coleman and Ron Carter and Tony Williams, and talk about that a little bit. But his advice to you was so simple and so profound, and something that I work on in ear training with students at the new school.
Oh, interesting. Well, yeah, Bill was, just I didn't know the word mentor, but he was kind of a mentor. He was my idol, and I'd go see him. Mm-hmm. So one night, I lived over in Berkeley, and I was playing with Cal Jader at the time. And I joined Cal. I got the gig when I was 19 and went on the road with him. I dropped out of college, and it was a great experience. It was a great rhythm section. Dick Burke on drums and John Hurt on bass. This guy, Michael Smith, on percussion. And, we traveled all over. I got to learn how to play Latin jazz, which I really didn't know. And I didn't know anything, man. I could just play, but I didn't know harmony. So Cal showed me Lush live. He was a really good piano player as well as a vibes player and a good drummer. So we always played these gigs at all the jazz clubs that were happening. And whenever we played, it usually often before or after Bill Evans was playing. Maybe he'd be playing the 2 weeks before us, like for concerts by the sea in LA or El Matador or San Francisco. These gigs were always 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And, Tuesday through Sunday, 3 sets a night during the week, 4 sets a night for weekends. And that's just the way we played. And, that's how I learned how to play on the bandstand. And, Bill, I had my teacher when I was 15 had given me this, Live at the Village Band. And it blew my mind. I'd never heard any music like that, the way the band interrelated, the trio. So I wanted to meet him. So that's how I met him. I was introduced to him by probably Dick Burke or somebody. Mm-hmm. But I just became like we could say stalker. I would just go every single night when he was in San Francisco.
Well, it's funny you say 3 sets and then 4 sets on the weekend. And that used to be a time when, you could have a 2 a.m. set and people would actually show up.
The breakfast show.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And the sets were short, by the way.
Right.
45 minutes. They weren't long sets. It was 45 minutes. You'd play your little theme and get off. Everybody had a theme, Cannonball and
right.
Cal. But so I just go over there to San Francisco. I just get in my car and I'd go for the last set because I like to hang with Bill. Yeah. And he was always open. I mean, he had nothing to do on the road. And so we would go out. We would just go out to this place, Pam Pam, and eat. And I would just ask him question after question after question. He was so nice to me. I was, 20, 21, and, what was Miles, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, one day I was trying to learn Stella by Starlight because I love that, live at Concerts by the Sea, My Funny Valentine album you were talking about. And I was trying to figure it out. And to me at that time, it wasn't like a regular rhythm. It wasn't rhythm changes. It wasn't the blues, So
some sort of sophisticated and a little deceptive harmonies in there.
Yeah, deceptive harmony. And then if you go by that album, the way those guys were playing it, they were really free. So not only was it deceptive in a regular way, they doubled the amount of time on each chord. And then, Ron, because Ron Carter is really, I think, kind of the genius of all that stuff. He's playing all these different notes and they're following each other, so I'm just trying to learn the tune.
And in that period also, they added a bunch of chromatic substitutions, which I thought was something George Coleman brought into that band, but who knows, really?
Could be. I think Ron, I feel like when I analyze the music now, and I called Ron recently about it, we're friends. I used him on a movie score once, and I know Herbie too, but I don't, hey, Herbie, I don't do that. But with Ron, I said, I'm listening to Sorcerer, Ron. What the hell are you doing? He goes, I don't remember, man. But, he plays very horizontally. Now, the chords are going by vertically. Yeah. But he's just playing the melodies. Anyway, but you're right. I think they did figure out nice substitutions. But, and Miles could go with it,
Right.
Miles was like a different generation. And those guys loved Ornette. So they're trying to be free within that. You know, there's a lot of tension going on.
There's
Anyway, I was trying to figure that tune out.
For people who don't know this music that well,
Yeah.
you're talking like transitional period 61, 62, 63, 64.
Yeah, exactly. It was a big transitional period. It was, you know, I guess right after kind of Blue, and then, you know, In a Silent Way and all that. And then these guys would go play live, and then there was a Love Supreme. You know, it was all changing, man. We were, you know, that's the thing, is like now it's everybody's looking backwards, but and then every gig was trying to play something new and put this new stuff in there. And it was, you know, it was an amazing time, you know, at the same time as the Beatles and, you know, Rolling Stones, and it wasn't separate, you know.
So before we go too much further on this tangent,
this is
a delight,
Yeah.
but the advice that Bill gave you.
Yeah. So anyway, I went and I said, I'm trying to learn Stella. He goes, well, here's the way I learned a tune. He goes,
Yeah.
you play the melody in your right hand, you play the bass note in your left hand, and in between, you play two inner voices. So it's really like a Bach chorale. He didn't say that, but that's what it's like.
And something about it, see if you can use the third and the seventh.
Yeah, you want to use the third and seventh if you're doing jazz and you're doing these 2-5-1 chords, which would be like a C minor 7 to an F7 to a B flat major 7. B flat being at that little point, B flat is the one chord, even though it's not necessarily the key, you know, the root of the key. So if you're looking at it like that, you play the third, and you know, it's kind of like your thumbs or something. You know, you're playing the melody with your little finger. You're on the right hand. You're playing the bass, little finger in your left hand, and you're having these it's like little spiders walking around on the inside. So
yeah,
what he said was use the third and seventh as a starting off point. And then what I realized was, if I'm going to think linearly as opposed to, again, this is more thinking horizontally, linear and mixing it with, you know, everything that I play, I got like 5 or 6 or 7 harmonic concepts going at once. But this little concept is isolating those notes and letting them inside create their own melody. So you actually have 4 melodies. And that was a mind blower for me. And I was, you know, 20 years old, and what a good time to hear it.
Yeah.
Because I was just delving into harmony, you know, at that point.
That's such a great, clear way, you know, of clarifying how harmony works and how to spell it and how to hear it.
And then what I came up with, and it's not original, I never came up with anything original necessarily, but I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to do the third and the seventh,
yeah,
then the seventh of the 2 chord moves down to the third of the 5 chord, and blah, 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 all that kind of natural movement. I can add a 9th or 13th, and they're going to have these same movements. And all of a sudden, you got all those sounds. And really, I mean, I have a thing called synesthesia. So in my mind, I have colors for everything. I have colors for notes, days of the week, months of the year, you know, and numbers. So when I think of notes on the piano, I think of colors. So I start thinking about the colors, these sounds, other than the root, to me, in a way, the root, the melody, the third and seventh are the black and white, you know, they're the black and white part of it. They're the structure part of it, like the foundation of a building. And then the color notes, these other notes, are like when you build the building and you put in the apartments and the rugs and the furniture and all that, you know, that's all.
Well, it's like you said, a Bach chorale.
Yeah, that's not the Bach chorale.
For independent melodies.
Well, if you do that, and then you start adding.
I sort of think of monk tunes in a similar way, that you could break those down into a melody note, a bass note, and 2 middle notes, and that pretty much spells the whole.
The monkey could do it probably with 3 notes total.
Yeah,
you know, really root and sevenths, because those bebop guys you would usually they just do 2 notes in their left hand a lot of times, you know. So they even pared it down. But I know what you mean. Yeah, we could. I mean, if you look at Ruby My Dear or something, that's definitely a regular old standard in that way. But it's a great way. It's just a great way to get. For me, I'm just saying, how do I get to it so I can put my personality on something? But I'm not a fast. I mean, I can say read some stuff, play a bunch of stuff. But if I really want to know a tune, or if I compose a tune and I want to know how to even play on my own tunes, I have to live with it. I have to be there, man. You know. Oh.
Beautiful. Yeah. I saw this quote about your book from Sonny Rollins, and he says, "I hope this book sells because Michael owes me money." And,
funny line.
It's a good one. But you did play with Rollins, and
Yeah, I played with Sonny for 2 years.
so
He probably owes me money.
have you paid him back?
But yeah, I joined Sonny. Well, I was with Cannonball. I was his last pianist that he died. And I was 22 at the time. That was the best sideman gig for me because my two idols were Miles and Ken.
Wow.
So
Did you take over from Joe Zawinul in that?
No, after Joe, George Duke did it, and then Hal Galper, and then I did it after Hal.
Nice.
And
Nice.
I had met Cannonball though when I was in college, because when I was at UC Berkeley, there was an Alameda Junior College band. This guy, Bill Bell, who had been my teacher, ran it, and Cannonball was the guest host. And Bill told him, you got to check out this kid, So
Wow.
Cannonball, and I immediately, when he played, it was like, zzz, I just went to him and I started playing all this stuff, and we kind of fell in love musically. It's what it's like.
Beautiful.
So when I was with Cal Jader, like a couple years later, I called him and said, will you come hear me with Cal? And he came down when I was playing in LA.
Wow.
And Cal was so sweet. He goes, I'd love for my band to have the opportunity to perform with you. I love your transition from the rhythmic to the lyrical. He was eloquent.
Yeah.
But he had another pianist. So just at a certain point, I was in New York and Roy McCurdy was in my apartment, the drummer. And he says, yeah, Hal just said he's going to drop out of the band. And I got on the phone in Cannonball, and I wasn't really direct. I just, hey, I just wanted to say hi and make sure you have my number. Usually I was so cocky and when I was young, but at that one I was just cool.
Oh, with Cannonball, yeah.
Because I loved him and he was so sweet. And then he called me for the gig, So it was anyway. So after that, he died. Unfortunately, I got to do one album with him called Phoenix. And the next album, I had been writing all this music for it. And God, I wish he'd lived, at least 5 years. Because I just love that band. Anyway, so then I played with Jean-Luc Ponty. Didn't get along with him. 3 months with that guy, and it was very rigid and loud and electric. I mean, it was cool, but so then I got with Sonny because how did I get with Sonny? Maybe through Eddie Moore, the drummer, who I knew. And that was a fantastic experience. And again, I was so young. I think I was 23, and I didn't appreciate that Sonny Rollins was the greatest probably jazz improviser or one of the iconic jazz musicians. I just thought it was a cool gig. I dig him. Yeah. I was always feeling these guys were lucky to have me. That's how when I was young, that was my attitude. Like these old fuckers. Well, I'm going to give them my electric piano with my wah-wah pedal and my ring modulator and my Echoplex. Come on, motherfucker.
When you're 23, yeah. You
That's what I was feeling when I was with Cal Jader at 20. And I was playing with Jizzy and Clark Terry and the Latin Jam, and I thought these old guys, man, they're cool.
Well, it must not have been like that with Nancy Wilson because you had a long production.
Well, I was with Nancy, so Sonny was 2 years. That was an amazing experience.
Yeah.
When I got after Sonny, I wasn't going to go on the road anymore. I had a band with my friend Alex Foster, the sax player, called Answering Service, and we were really successful. I mean, we hadn't made an album, but we were talking about it, and then Nancy. John Levy managed Cal, he managed Cannonball, and he managed Nancy. So my career is sort of owed to John because he just liked me. So he called me to do Nancy Wilson in 1978. I was 26. I was getting old, And that was a demanding gig because I had never conducted, I knew the gig was conducting, as well as it was musical director. So playing, arranging, conducting, it was a wide swath and a much bigger, more things were required of me. So before I got that gig, they flew me to Kansas City, and Nancy was playing with the Kansas City Symphony. And I was sitting by the side of the stage with a little tape recorder, taping it and looking at the music. So I said, I have to figure this out because the next gig that I was going to do was the Latin Casino in New Jersey with a big, opening for the Spinners, or they were opening for her with a really big orchestra. I was like, God, how am I going to figure this out? So anyway, that was, again, on the job training. I never studied that stuff, but I took a couple lessons from Tom Pearson, who was conducting the Wiz.
Wow.
Tom?
Sure.
So I didn't think I knew him somehow, or somebody turned me on to him. So I went down to the play and hung out with him between matinee and evening. And I said, look, I got to conduct for Nancy. He goes, well, who's the drummer? Oh, Roy McCurdy. Man, just count him off and cut it. Count him off and then cut him off and just play the piano. You know, you don't have to worry too much. But, you know, I just.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had done some acting. So I said, I had to buy a tuxedo, you know. I'm going to just pretend to be a conductor. That's what I did. And then later on.
Clarity. I mean, you're listening to an audio podcast, so you can't see Michael waving his arm like a real conductor here. But it's clarity.
Well, that's what I learned. In fact, when I conducted that first time at Latin Casino, there was a Russian guy who was the lead violinist, you know, concert master. And after the 2 weeks, he said, I have to say, you're one of the best conductors we ever had. I went, really? He goes, yeah, you count us off very clearly and you let us play. And then when you cut us off, it's very clear. You don't get in the way, but we know exactly what's going on. I went, all right, man. So I realized this isn't that hard. But then we played a gig with the Fort Worth Symphony, and that went fine. And then I met the conductor, and he said, well, look, I'm going to turn you on to my teacher in New York. I can't remember that guy's name. And I really studied.
Wow.
You know, how to have a good beat and how to invite them in and the upbeat. And again, I know basic conducting. So even now with my string quartet piece, there are parts where I conduct it and I just love it. Something about conducting in the air, and, you know, you can see where those guys live forever. It feels really good. But with Nancy Wilson, it took me I was with her 5 years. And we had a great bassist, John B. Williams, who was bass. And we started actually with Ralph Pinhole on drums and then Roy McCurdy. And so I would say it took me 2 years to be good at accompanying, because I'd play with Airto and Flora for him, but that was a different thing. It was all kind of crazy. But with Nancy, you know, very sophisticated. And it took me a couple of years to figure out that I was young and I wanted to play all my stuff, you know, that my job was to make her sound good, sound better. Everything I played was in service of this singer.
Yeah.
And once I figured that out, and that was, you know, it was like I was a dunce, you know, it didn't just hit me. I mean, I had to play and then start listening. You know, it was just experiential. That's why I think it's hard to learn all this stuff in college. Like my students will say, how do you comp? I go, man, how can I teach you how to comp? I mean, I can give you some concepts and you could listen to some people, but you got to do it, you know. That's how I learned to
spirit of it. Yeah.
When I was young, I didn't know what was going on. You know, I'm just playing. But now I think I can hear everything people are playing, or almost everything they're playing. But that took years for me. I'm slow, you know.
I don't know about that. It leads me to this song title that you sent over called Tough Ashkenazi.
Yeah.
Let's hear some of that. Nice.
Well, you know what happened was when I first came back from cancer, where I did one of my first gigs was a duo gig at Mesro with Ben Allison. And I was, again, not in great shape. Like the first set, I had good energy. Second set, it was like I was running through sand, you know. But my friend Fred Hirsch came out, you know, and we've known each other 40 or 50, you know, it's a long time, right? A little younger than I, but we probably met, I'd say almost 50 years. And, you know, Fred's gone through his serious, you know, challenges with HIV and, you know, so many illnesses and all this stuff. So after the first set, he was there, and I go, Fred, it means so much that you came out. He goes, oh, man, you're sounding really strong. I go, how did we do it? He goes, some tough Ashkenazis. Of course, I said tough Ashkenazi motherfuckers. But so we call each other TAM, Tam. You can edit that out. But anyway, so that's how that came about. And I thought, I'm going to write this for Fred. So I really wrote it for me and Fred. Like Fred and I, you know, we kind of came through. You know, he had a 2-month coma. I mean, all the stuff we'd been through. And I thought, oh, not that this is a tough tune, but I wanted to just write this piece that I thought, you know, it's not like an impressionist piece of that, but it's just for him, you know, for that. So
great. Wow. Did Fred ever play that? I wonder.
No, I didn't write it for him to play it.
Yeah.
I should give it to him.
You played it.
I don't know if it's his style, but yeah, I
Band
just wrote it.
Great.
Huh?
And the band sounds great.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. I love, you know, I met Alan. I mean, I played with, you know, Ben is in my neighborhood in downtown. So when I was super sick, I met Ben. I don't know how I met him, but he played a gig at Zankel Hall, you know, Carnegie Hall. And I went, and I just loved his playing. And that was before I got cancer. Then when I got sick, you know, I was in bed for 8 months. I really couldn't leave except to go to the doctor. I was so fucked up. And Ben would come over every now and then. We'd play together. I just hobbled to the piano, and he was nice enough to play with me. I didn't even know what I could play then. And so once I started going, I wanted to play with Ben, and then I still play with Ben. And then when we needed a drummer for that Errol Garner thing, he said, well, I've been playing with Alan Midnard. I think he would fit in because he's so sensitive. I mean, he can play any level, but I wanted a level where we're all really listening and conversing. And
sure.
He's a really great drummer. I don't like the word tasty because I like people to play a lot, but he's just in the same moment we're in, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah. So important. You've done so much in film and television, and I just wanted to ask a little bit about the period of The Tick Code, which is a movie probably a lot of people know about and have seen, but may not have known how involved you were in the story itself and in making the music for it.
Well, I had to sleep with the writer to get this kid writing the score.
I hear you're still working on that.
Oh, I'm still trying to get her to sleep with me. But my wife, at the time, I don't think we were married, was Polly Draper, I met her when I was the band leader of the Arsenio Hall show, and she was on a show called 30 Something. She was a guest. And actually, you know, I did 5 years of stand-up comedy in New York, and I used to do the improv and in various clubs. And when I would play the improv on Tuesdays at 9, my set was 9:15. And then I'd sit at the bar for free beers because you maybe make $12 or something. And there's a show that always come on, 30 Something. And I love this long-legged woman who had a hoarse voice, Polly Draper. So when I got on Arsenio and I saw she was going to be a guest, I said, I got to meet Polly Draper. Because that's how I met her, you know. And
nice.
Anyway, it took a while for us to get going out. But so once we were together, we're dating. And one time she goes, what's going on with you? And I said, well, I have Tourette's syndrome. And the only way I know is a friend of mine's sister-in-law was a social worker, and it's said to me, once you have Tourette's, but I'd never been diagnosed because in my day, even my dad, it was a psychiatrist, said, well, you don't have that Tourette's thing. You don't swear. You don't have coprolalia. But this woman told me to read this book by Oliver Sacks called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. And he had
great book.
A really good chapter in there called Witty Tiki Ray. And Ray was a guy, that's not his real name, but he was a guy who had a big Tourette's, you know, case. And during the week, he would take his meds, whatever it was. And then on the weekend, he was a drummer. So once I read that, I went, shit, I got Tourette's syndrome, but I'd never really been diagnosed, but I figured it out.
Wow.
So when I told my wife that, she got interested in it, you know, and she just wrote her first screenplay. She was an actress, and she'd done some writing on she slipped in some writing stuff for 30 Something. Cause you know, in those days they weren't that interested frankly, in a woman doing that part, but she had a producer that really liked her. So she'd write for that. Mm-hmm. And then she wrote this screenplay about a 12-year-old jazz piano kid with Tourette's syndrome. and he has an idol that ended up being played by Gregory Hines, who's a jazz sax player with Tourette syndrome. And my wife, Polly, played the mom, and she has a affair, love affair with that guy. Anyway, so she wrote that and raised the money, and I wrote the music to that, the tick code. And that was a great experience for me personally, because I had, even when I was on our senior hall show, I was so ashamed of what I did, my ticks and noises. I would try really hard not to do them. I can't stop them, but I could stop them for when I was on camera, and it made me come to terms with something about me. And I was in my late 30s when this happened. So it was a big gift that she gave me. And I got involved with the Tourette Syndrome Association, which was a group that, was there for raising money for research and for all kinds of stuff for helping kids and adults with Tourette's. So then I got involved with them. I ended up being chairman of the board at one point, starting a thing in Congress. So I mean, it opened a huge door for me into myself, really.
Yeah, and awareness for everybody.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, and we have a caucus now in Congress that I started with. I have a friend, Steve Cohen, who's a congressman from Memphis.
Yeah,
Tennessee, the only Jewish guy ever to have a major office in Tennessee. It's not exactly lovely for Jews and Black people there, even though it's so. Anyway, his constituency is mostly African American, and he just took me around in the halls of Congress, man, and everybody we'd run into, he'd introduce them to me, and he'd say, "We want to start this caucus," and they go, "Well, Steve, are you in it?" And he goes, "Yeah." They go, "Okay." So we started the caucus, which means you get all the people from Congress and all their staffers to come together, and you tell them about it, because what you're trying to do is get money for the National Institutes of Health and stuff like that from them to, because Tourette's is considered an orphan disease. Anyway, it's a whole thing. But it meant so much to me to do that. And because I realized in music, I love music so much, I was doing it really for me, even though I know people got it. Yeah. But when I see all these people on the board, all this, they're doing all this, their whole, everything they're giving us for other people. I just learned a lot from working with a nonprofit about life and people, how beautiful people can be to help others. Nobody got paid. We're on our board, we're flying all over and doing all this stuff.
It's a real
it was a great experience for my life.
Yeah, that's amazing to be of service in that way, and through your music, that's a real gift.
Definitely.
Fantastic. So back to your kids, you sent me a track that you made with your son, Alex.
Yeah.
And it was around the book release, I think.
Yeah, I made it on the book. Somebody said, "Why don't you? Well, you're a musician. Why don't you put in a link to a song?" And I went, "Oh, okay." And I want to do a song that's not anywhere else. So I was working on these tenths on the piano, just technically of how I wanted to play them. And I just started, I have this system of playing that I learned from a teacher years ago. This guy, Jerome Gray, who lived up in Seattle. And he came up with a system sort of based on Chopin's way of looking at the piano by the black keys and the white keys. And when you look at intervals like tenths or thirds, you have notes that are white to white, black to white, white to black, and black to black. It's just a way of getting out of regular harmony. So you can just free yourself. So I can get sounds that I like, and I know the harmony, but I can just move the sounds around and just kind of do what I want to do. It frees me, So I was doing that with tenths. Like, what are all the white to white tenths? And then I just kind of wrote this piece. It just came together. So my son, Alex, both he and my son, Nat, are very successful movie actors and TV and movie. And, besides being musicians,
they still have the band?
Huh?
They
still have their band, Nat and Alex Wolff. They have a new album coming out. But they mostly spend their time with movies. Like Alex is getting ready to direct his second movie that he wrote. Right. Will star in. And Nat's starring in an Amazon show called The Consultant with Christoph Waltz. Nice. And so, but that's what they've been doing all their life. My wife created a show for them called the Naked Brothers Band that was on Nickelodeon when they were children, based on their music. And so anyway, Alex was in town, so I just started playing this tune, and he sat down with the drums. He's the drummer. And I just turned on my voice memo, and we were talking through it.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, well, that's cool. Now I'll go record it. So I went to record it with some guys. And I was listening with a friend, and he goes, man, just use that thing you did with Alex. It's really loose and hip and more inside, and it hears you talking. So I just used that, I could have edited out the talking. We did that, and I thought, I'll leave the talking.
Yeah, nice. And if you get the book, there's a QR code in the back where you can download the song for free.
Exactly. And it's only there that you can get it. I don't really have it in any other place.
Wow. That's nice.
Yeah.
That sounds like a basis for a whole new record to just record it on your voice memo.
Wouldn't that be fun? I mean, the sound's pretty good. I had a guy mix it, and, it sounded pretty good to me,
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm going to play some of it to go out, but it's been so great talking to you. And I'm sure you have new projects coming up, and you're moving around. You're on both coasts, right?
Yeah, I'm on both coasts. I always have been, because my wife's an actress and a writer and a director. So she's doing a TV show now on ABC. And so she's in LA a lot. But we had our house from when we were both on TV. I was on Arsenio and she was on 30-something. And then when we, at a certain point, decided to she was doing a movie when our oldest son was 3.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was in New York. And we put our kid in preschool in New York. We still had a place there. We decided we want to raise our kids in New York. It's just kind of cooler, So, but we kept our place in LA so we were always back and forth before the kids were really in school where it mattered. We do winter and summer in LA, spring and fall in New York,
Wow.
But
I hope to see you around town then. And
because I'm at NYU, I'm there all the school year.
Teaching at NYU. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm teaching at NYU. I've been there about 3 years.
Uh-huh.
And I really, really enjoy it. I mean, it was, after being sick, actually when Dave Schroeder is the guy that runs the program, and now he's head of the whole music department.
Yeah.
Chairman of the department. I'd been, when I was at the new school, like 10 years ago, I was teaching the R&B ensemble.
Mm-hmm.
But the Rhythm and Blues Review Ensemble or something. But I'm more into teaching improvisation, stuff like that. But that was a good experience. But I would sub sometimes over at NYU, but they didn't really. I'd say, Dave, I'd like to come over here. He goes, well, we don't really have a spot. But then Andy Milne left to go to Michigan. I think he's somewhere in Michigan. So he asked me to do it, and I had really been sick, and I didn't know if I could do it. But I thought, well, I'll just try it. And then I just loved it. I mostly just teach lessons. I have an ensemble. That's it. They never asked me what I was going to teach. There's no syllabus. There's no hassle. It's and I've been getting better and better and better students.
Awesome.
Many of my students are Asian now because they have a big Asian thing in Beijing at NYU. I've got just great musicians, and so I found like with all I've been through to be able to teach, and I really teach from the way I learned. I said to them, you gotta get A's, you gotta study the way they teach you here, but I'm going to show you how I learned. It's a different concept of harmony. It's a different way of looking at it, and that's what I try to share.
It's life. It's a life of a creative artist.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's I'm not, a friend of mine says a bird is not an ornithologist. So, I have to be a bit of an ornithologist to teach there, but I'm trying to teach them how to be a bird. And it's not, truthfully, when I started teaching there, I called up Sonny Rollins. I go, Sonny, because we still talk, we're close. And I go, Sonny, I'm teaching these kids, but I have to say that, I don't know, I was 16 or 17. I was happening already. And some of them, I'm trying to just teach them the feel or this or that. And he goes, man, when I was 17, I was with Miles. You can either play or you can't. I go, well, that's true. So I just try to give them what I give them. They can take it if they want to do something with it. And I've had a couple really good players. And NYU is not the place you're necessarily going to get the best players because undergraduates have to have a good SAT score and good grades. That doesn't necessarily go with being a jazz musician. Graduate students is different, but I've actually had some really, really good musicians. So it's,
Nice.
I've learned so much from them because, they're just into what they're into.
Yeah.
All those, meters and all that stuff like that. So I learned a lot.
Wow. Great. Well, I hope to see you around town, and thank you
Yeah.
so much for making the time and for the book and for
Yeah, I
everything.
hope people will get it. I'm really proud of the book. I mean, when I look at it now, I mean, if, you make these albums, sometimes you go, oh, that's a pretty good album. Sometimes you go, I could have been better. Or, I'm really critical. But this book took so long. There's so much work. I had a lot of help. I'm a reader, so I've read since I was a little kid. And every time you read a book, they always think they're editor. I go, who's this editor person? What is it? And now that I did a book, I went, oh my God, Laura Ross was my editor. She was amazing helping. I wanted to not lose my voice, but she would help me clarify things and, make it smoother and, like an editor in a movie or something.
Well, we're really grateful to have it. So thank you,
Good.
Michael.
I'm so happy you read it.
Talking. So stick around and we'll talk about Miles and them.
All right.
Thanks for listening to this special episode with Michael Wolff. As always, visit greenleafmusic.com for a lot more and hope you enjoyed it. See you next time. Thanks.